Welcome to Metro Talk. I'm Kent Scheffel. Thanks for being with us. Pat Gowan's here. Pat's one of the editors with the Post-Dispatch. Welcome, Pat.
Hi, Kent.
And Sam Stem, the general manager and president of WBGZ Radio, is alongside. Welcome, Sam.
Glad to be here again.
Sam, a report by the Associated Press says more than 10,000 state employees have joined unions in the past 8 years. Many of those workers had been considered management, and at the rate it's going, if all the pending requests are approved, 97% of the state workers will be union members. Are we getting to have too many union members among the state ranks?
Well, the statistics you quote are accurate, and in fact, if all the pending requests are granted, there will be about 1,700 bosses for 50,000 state workers in round numbers. And even Democratic Governor Pat Quinn and House Majority Leader Barbara Flynn Curry, a Chicago Democrat, they think it's a problem. Curry so much so that she sponsored legislation in the lame duck session which would limit to some degree the state workers that would be eligible to join unions. As we speak, Governor Quinn is negotiating with the AFSCME union to try to define who would be considered management and who would be eligible to join a union. It's so critical that in the Department of Aging, that in addition to the director, only one other employee would be non-union. So it really starts to lead you to the question as to, who's going to be managing these union workers if they all belong to the bargaining unit. By contrast, in the state of Wisconsin, where we've heard so much about the governor and unions and collective bargaining, only 60% of their workers belong to unions, where currently in Illinois it's 94%, and if these pending requests are granted, it'll be almost 98% of the state workers will have belonged to unions. But there's another interesting fact, and that is that under former Governor Blagojevich, you guys have heard of him, there were about 67,000 state workers. Now under Pat Quinn, there are about 50,000 state workers. And there's some belief that the workers were treated so badly by the policies of the Blagojevich administration that now anybody and everybody that can get the protection of the union is scrambling to try to do that, to try to avoid some of what the workers felt was mistreatment under the Blagojevich administration. So in answer to your question, are too many state workers joining the union? Well, even Pat Quinn and Barbara Flynn Curry think so, and I think so too. And I think it's time to maybe sit down for the legislature to try to define who is management and who's eligible to join a union.
Unrelated to the union issue, those were some interesting numbers you threw out. With 67,000 state workers under Blagojevich, 50,000 now. When we talk about state cuts, that's a lot of cutting to eliminate 17,000 jobs.
Yes, indeed.
Pat, have we reached the point where we've got too many state employees in the union?
A lot of cutting and a lot of incentive to join a union to protect your job. Post-Dispatch, I don't know about now, used to have 11 unions in the shop, and our ID badges were color-coded to whether you were in a union and which union, and whether you were management. And I was in the union, as were the reporters, as they still are. I've been management for years as an editor, and I remember when I switched over, one of my fellow editors told me I was switching to the red badge of courage. And I said, well, I understand in a sort of literary sense what that means, but what are you talking about? And he said, well, the ID badge, the background was red for management, and it was the red badge of courage because you were leaving the union protection, going out on your own where they could fire you at whim. Now, they virtually never fired anybody, and I've been in management now for 11 or 12 years, and they haven't gotten around to firing me yet, so I guess that's okay. But when you couple the craziness of the Blagojevich years with the drumbeat of cut more, cut more, cut more, it's easy to understand why a lot of people would want the protection of a union. To some extent, managers don't necessarily want to be in unions because it sort of equalizes the pay. You're probably going to be paid more in management as a free agent to some extent. I would think that experience would show. So the increasing unionization of bosses suggests to me a willingness to sacrifice to some extent in pay for job security, which might come with being part of the union. I mean, we're talking about prison wardens and assistant wardens being in the union, things that just don't make very much sense in any grand scheme of things. I was thinking in our newsroom, I'm talking through my hat, but I'm guessing we're probably 3-to-1 union. Maybe, certainly in the Metro News staff, probably about 3-to-1, which seems like a pretty workable percentage. It has been, and they're not hardline union people, and everybody gets along very well. If they all go on strike, I guess we're in real trouble. There's no managers of the left to take over the work, and I don't know what you do to stop it. Labor law is something that really escapes me. I know that, for example, this latest batch is pending approval by the Illinois Labor Relations Board, but I don't know what rights the board has to turn down a group that organizes and wants to be a part of a union. And it's not necessarily a safe thing politically to push back against unions in Illinois, but under the circumstances, it does seem like we're real topsy-turvy.
Well, and Quinn, as he is negotiating with the unions, trying to maybe put a cap on how many state employees can join the unions, he's drawing some wrath from the union leaders. They're pointing out that, he was critical of Scott Walker's, Quinn was critical of Scott Walker's positions up in Wisconsin, and they're saying Quinn's criticism of Walker is incongruous with his desire to limit how many state workers could join unions here. So it's a tough tightrope to walk for state leaders who, especially Democrats, who enjoy often the support of unions when they run for re-election, and yet are seeing some of these concerns with too many workers joining unions, and so it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But obviously, when you have the Democratic majority leader in the House and the governor both trying to put some limits on how many workers can join the unions, it's a concern at their level, and they're meeting resistance from the union leaders, who, of course, would like for as many people as possible to join unions, because that means they're paying union dues, which puts more money in the hands of the union leaders to help lobby their cause.
To the extent I'm aware, we're talking in theoreticals. I don't know where this has had any particularly negative impact on the delivery of services to the people. I can see potentials where under some circumstances it might, but I guess we're still sort of in a theoretical track right now.
But when you look, at that stat about the Department of Aging, you'd have the director and one other employee who are considered management, and everybody else is in the bargaining unit. You could see where it would cause problems, especially like you say, if there were a strike. Well, who's running the Department on Aging and fulfilling the services that they're required to perform?
Same person running it, the services would be another story.
Yes.
You'd have two people who are very, very busy, I suppose.
We need to take a break. We've got more in a moment.
Hi, I'm Audrey Lucchese, and I'm from Alton, Illinois. I love music, and that's why I came to Lewis & Clark. It's been an amazing experience here at Lewis & Clark, working with students that are so talented, coming from all over the area, and they work so hard to follow their dreams. The music faculty at Lewis & Clark they're fantastic, and they're there every step of the way to push you to follow your dreams. One of the unique opportunities that I have had at Lewis & Clark is being able to record my own music with a fellow student here. Being able to record our music has opened doors for us in the music industry. My long-term goal is to finish here at Lewis & Clark and then to transfer to a four-year school and finish my degree in music performance. I would recommend Lewis & Clark to another student because it is definitely a great place to get started, and it can open so many doors for you.
Big dreams and good grades aren't enough to get into college. There are actual steps you need to take. Finding someone who can help is the first and most important. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.
watching Metro Talk. I'm Kent Scheffel, Sam Stem, and Pat Gowan are here. Pat, lawmakers in Springfield are considering legislation that would make it mandatory that if a sex education class is talking about abstinence, they also have to be talking about, or rather, if they're talking about abstinence, they also have to talk about contraception. Is it time for sex ed classes to have both topics?
You know, we never had sex ed classes when I was in school. Although I think there was sex then. I think that had been invented.
I think that's a safe bet.
I guess the thing that's more daunting to me as a parent, and I'm past this age now, although I'll have grandkids coming through this again. The thing more daunting to me than having sex education in school is having legislators telling teachers what to teach in sex education school. But the issue of how much to push for abstinence, the original bill, went back and took a look, was very loaded toward abstinence, and now it's been amended completely so that essentially the title of the bill remains, and now it's more balanced between abstinence and contraception. The original bill, I believe, required the state to seek funds from the federal government that were aimed at abstinence education, and I think that part of it has fallen away from the bill as it's now proposed in the Senate. It's a shame that the kids just can't learn all they need to learn at home, from my point of view. I have nothing against sex education in schools, but it's kind of a wink and a nod, because I really have the belief that pretty much every kid in the class knows as much, and perhaps in some cases more, than the teacher who's running the class. You know, these are things kids learn from each other probably more than any other way. And to me, a sex education class probably has more to do with straightening out the misinformation they've been given than it does to do with telling them anything that they didn't already know. These are kids who are acting on their hormones, that are acting on not terribly good sense. You can preach abstinence till the cows come home. It doesn't seem to make very much difference in what actually goes on. It seems to me disingenuous to talk about abstinence without also talking about contraception in ways they can protect themselves from STDs and pregnancies. So it makes sense to me for the entire array of possibilities to be laid out there, from abstinence to contraception. And anytime you get involved in issues of the bedroom in a public school, you've got controversy, and because there's so many different points of view on the part of parents and so forth, which takes me back to what I said initially. I wish there was some way to do this. Maybe they ought to farm it out like some places do with driver's ed. You know, you just leave it to the private schools. Have some private sex ed school deal with it.
Sam, there's legislation being considered in Springfield that says you can not only teach abstinence, but you also have to teach contraception in a sex ed class. Is it time for that?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting the way you phrase the question, because I think there would be a lot of people watching us right now that might believe that all they're teaching is contraception and what they ought to be teaching is abstinence. I think that the more information in this day and age that you can put in the hands of students, the better off they are. And I think maybe the way to handle it is to, yes, allow the schools to teach everything that needs to be taught. You know, back in our day, they taught us, back then they didn't use the moniker STDs, they taught us about VD. But you know, in this day and age, with HIV, you know, back in our day, they'd talk about, well, you know, you'd have to have penicillin if you caught this disease or that disease, but in this day and age, it'll kill you, you know, and there is no cure. So shouldn't we be concerned about students having that knowledge and knowing what they're up against if they make a mistake in a moment of passion? So I think it would be helpful if the schools were given free rein to go ahead and teach what needed to be taught, but then leave it up to the parents to allow them to opt their student out if they wanted to. If they felt that on religious grounds or because, you know, they preferred to take care of that kind of teaching at home, you know, little Johnny or little Susie can opt out of the classes where, you know, this information is being handed out. But as Pat, I think, alluded to, in many instances, the kids aren't getting this information at home. And now they're getting it on the internet or on Facebook or on the playground or on the bus on the way to school, and the information they're getting may or may not be accurate. And it would be very helpful if someone, an authority figure with the correct information, was disseminating that information so that these kids who are sexually active at ages that you just can't believe when you look at some of the statistics, that they have the information that they need to protect themselves, perhaps from death.
Pat, we've talked quite a bit for the past few years about budget cuts. The items in the news this week, Governor Quinn's wanting to cut the budgets for the regional offices of education by $13 million. The supporters of those offices are saying that would be a big mistake. Also, a new study has come out that said Illinois is going to have 50% of its bridges in the state past their useful life by the year 2030. Is it time to cut the ROEs? Should we be providing more money to update our bridges?
Well, I think we should keep the money for the ROEs, but have them maintain the bridges as well, and then we can kill two birds with one stone. Interesting pairing of questions. By way of disclaimer, my wife does some contract work for the Madison County ROE. Very little, but she does. So I'm a bit conflicted here, but I think it's fair enough to say that I don't feel I have a command of that issue very well. You're talking about cutting, as I understand, $13 million spread across, I think it's 47 offices. That's about $276,000 an office, which is a large amount of money, but it's certainly not everything that's required to operate the office. So it isn't like, I keep hearing that this is going to make them go away, but I don't know that that's enough money to make them go away. I hear from the ROE side that they get 10 or 12 times that back in federal grants that they say only they can get, that money would be lost to the schools. I would like to know whether after the $13 million cut, they would still be able to draw in that money, because it makes it sound like if we don't have the $13 million, we can't parlay it into $180 million, but nobody's actually saying that in a way that I can understand either. They have an identity problem. A lot of people don't understand what it is they do, and they do a lot of things to do with teacher credentialing, with teaching school bus driving classes, with professional development programs, which is where my wife works on a mentoring program, teaching teachers and administrators the latest techniques of various things. They do things that school districts theoretically would do for themselves, but created this system to do instead because it was more economical to do it broad-based and have each district try to break off some piece of it for their own needs. Some of the work clearly would fall back on the schools, and as we keep shoving things from the state level down to the local level, you could argue that this would be a way of shoving things from Springfield all the way back to the Board of Education and not giving the economy of scale that the ROE can provide. So while I am somewhat conflicted, I also feel like I don't have a full grasp from either side of what the impact of this would be. Blagojevich, by the way, proposed it back a ways and it didn't go anywhere. As for the bridges, yeah, by 2030 we may be in worse shape, but right now we're doing better than most of the large states. We've only got like 6 or 7% of our bridges considered to be structurally deficient or functionally obsolete, as they say in the bridge business, and that's pretty good among the top 10 most populous states. I think we're the lowest or real low in that bracket, and fairly low nationally. So our bridges are probably in a bit better shape than they are around the rest of the country, but it's an easy thing to defer maintenance, especially in tough economic times, and if we're not careful about that, then by 2030 it'll come back to roost.
Sam, is it time to cut the budgets for the regional offices of education? And according to a study, we need to be worried about our bridges. Is it time to increase funding for those?
Well, I hate to break it to you guys, but by 2030, the three of us will probably be past our useful lifespans as well. So, and nobody's talking about giving any money to us, to try to tide us over. The problem, when you've got the state in such dire economic consequences as we are, in such a dire state, you have to cut somewhere. You have to cut almost everywhere. And so, every time somebody proposes a cut anywhere, there are going to be people who benefit from the funding that goes to whatever that entity is, jump up and say, look here, look at the horrible things that are going to happen if you cut funding here. And as a consequence, Pat mentioned that Blagojevich proposed cutting the regional offices of education, and nothing happened. And the state's financial woes got worse and worse and worse, and now we're at a crisis position, and now it's proposed that we cut $13 million from these ROEs. And the question comes up, is that a good place to cut? Well, probably there aren't a lot of good places to cut. But if we keep going the direction we're going, the whole thing's just going to implode under its own weight. There comes a point in time when you have to pay the piper. So, like Pat, I don't know, what the consequences of cutting 13 million here is going to be, but I don't know the consequences if you cut the Department of Conservation or the Department of Corrections, or last week we talked about cutting probation offices. It's not good to cut anything, I guess, if they're providing good services to the taxpayers of the state of Illinois, but you got to cut somewhere. And so maybe it's not 13 million, maybe it needs to be 8 million. Or maybe 13 million is not enough. Maybe it needs to be 16 million. But all I know is there have to be cuts somewhere, or we're never going to dig out of the hole we are. As far as the bridges, well, maybe we can defer maintenance. Somewhere between now and 2030, the economy is going to boom again, and there's going to be a glut of money coming from somewhere, and maybe then they can worry about the bridges. But I'm not too concerned about what the bridges are going to be like in 2030, because I'm not sure I'm going to be in any condition to even have to need a bridge in 2030. So it's not on my radar scope right now.
Let me jump in. What we're talking about highlights one of the problems in cutting anything. As a taxpayer, I look at my taxes. I pay all kinds of different taxes to all kinds of different places. But when we talk about cuts, the school board talks about cuts within its parameters, the state within its parameters, the city within its. Maybe there's something I'd rather cut out of the townships than the state, but the township doesn't need to cut its budget, but the state needs to cut its budget. So I end up with something I don't need from the township, while I lose something I do need from the state. And this is one of those situations with the ROE. If the ROE is saying it'll cost the school districts more to do what they have to do by law if we're gone, so I say, great, as a taxpayer, I just saved $2 on not funding my ROE, and my school bill went up $3 to take over the costs. I end up a net loser. But when you've only got when you cut only from the one sphere, you don't have those kinds of choices. And what the state's doing now is pushing more of it out of the state budget and onto the locals and saying, good luck in figuring out what to do. We're all seeing the teacher cuts that are going on now. That's a part of this. It's part of the state not funding its portion of it. And of course, we're running out of the stimulus money too. But we're seeing more of this being pushed down to the local level. So we're going to have to get to the point where the state says, well, we're in great shape, and the locals are all buckling under the weight.
We need to take a break. We'll have more after this.
Hello and welcome to the Lewis and Clark Minute. Today we're going to check out the radio broadcasting program in WLCA with Mike Lemons.
Have you ever listened to your favorite radio station or your favorite disc jockey and say, I could do that? Or maybe you're the type of person who says, I could never do something like that. Well, with the help of first-year mass comm student John, we're going to show you just how easy it is. Each voice intro starts with talking about the band that just played, and we add a station identifier. Next, you want to offer some information that may be of interest to your audience. And finally, tell the listeners what the next song is, who sings it, followed by another station identifier. John will do one live now.
Silver Sun Pickup Substitution on WLCA. The Big Pink released their debut album called A Brief History of Love. The single is off that album. It's The Big Pink with Dominoes. It's on College Radio's Best 89.9.
This has been your Lewis and Clark Minute.
What's that? I don't know. Something I kind of made. Ooh, what's it do?
What do I do? Well, thanks for asking. I ring my bell and I like to dance. What do I do? Well, thanks for asking.
Ow! Yeah, it still needs a little work.
Anything's possible. Keep thinking. Get started on your own inventions or just play some games at inventnow.org.
Sounds like you could use some Van Gogurt. It's fortified with arch-rich nutrients to improve your math and reading skills. Catch!
Van Gogurt, thanks. So what's the deal with your ear?
Always with the ear, huh?
Feed your kids the arts. For 10 simple ways to learn how, visit AmericansForTheArts.org.
You're watching Metro Talk. Sam Stem and Pat Gowan are here. Sam, Senator Claire McCaskill in Missouri is paying back almost $300,000 in back taxes for a plane she owes. owns rather, didn't realize those taxes hadn't been paid, according to her. She said a mistake was made. Is this going to be a big issue in the next election, or how big of an issue in the next election?
Well, it depends on how many commercials her opponent can afford to run, because I'm sure it'll be mentioned as often as possible. It's certainly something that I'm sure she wants to put as far in her rearview mirror as she can. Even if it was an honest mistake, which she claims it was, it doesn't look good. You're in a position where you're talking about raising taxes on the rich, and here you're rich enough to own a plane, and you're not paying your taxes. Even, as I said, if it was an honest mistake, it doesn't pass the smell test very well, and her opponent, I'm sure, will exploit it as much as it can be exploited.
Pat, how big of an issue is it going to be in the next election?
Nobody billed it for her. I think it was an honest mistake because she came forward and realized it and paid it. It wasn't like there was suddenly a bill for it. The real problem she's got is it's exposed just how rich she is. She can have a private plane and say, oh yeah, well, you write a check for $300,000 and no problem. Although my mother taught me years ago, always vote for the rich candidate, she said. My mother's very apolitical, but she was serious about that. She says, if they're already rich, they don't need to line their own pockets with the taxpayers' money. And that was the advice I got about politics from my mom, and it's not an entirely bad idea, I guess. The other thing that's interesting is that McCaskill and her rich husband, she married into wealth. They used to charter their plane at Parks Airport in Illinois, and apparently with Illinois not having personal property tax, they didn't know it. So at a time when people in Missouri are pointing across the river and saying, look at high tax Illinois, I think Senator McCaskill would have saved about $300,000 if they'd parked their plane at Parks Airport instead of Spirit Airport in St. Louis County. But the interesting thing there will be to see whether they move it.
Now, the word was they were going to sell it.
I believe her words were, I think I can say this on our air, sell the damn plane. I think she realizes this has gotten to be rather a liability.
Well, Senator John Kerry had that problem with his yacht. He was keeping it in a harbor, I think, in Connecticut, and avoiding paying the tax in Massachusetts, and that came back to bite him as well. And then, of course, he voluntarily then paid the tax to Massachusetts. So damned if you do and damned if you don't. You parked the airplane in Illinois to save the tax, and that would come back to bite you too.
That's going to do it for this edition of Metro Talk. Thanks for being with us. I'm Kent Scheffel. Sam Stem, the president and general manager of WBGZ, has been here, along with Pat Gowan, one of the editors with the Post-Dispatch. We'll see you next time.